Magnus Carlsen is one of the best chess players of all time, who became the world champion after defeating Viswanathan Anand in 2013, being the #1 player for more than 10 years, while achieving a peak rating of 2,882. Almost nobody could defeat Magnus Carlsen at his peak. He had played 125 consecutive chess matches without losing a single one. But what happens when he faces the best female player of all time? This is Judith Polgar, a Hungarian chess grandmaster hailed as the best female player ever. In 1991, at a tender age of 15 years and 4 months, she became the youngest grandmaster in history, passing the legendary Bobby Fischer. In their much-anticipated match, Polgar starts with pawn to e4, and Magnus responds with pawn to c5, opting for Sicilian defense, a move he has played countless times and is very familiar with. Polgar develops her knight to g3, aiming to contest the central 4 squares while developing her pieces. Magnus slides his kingside pawn to c6, and Judith brings her second pawn forward to d4. The move she played against Magnus in 2014 ended up getting crushed by Magnus, but this time she had a trick up her sleeve. The game continues with each player making strategic moves, and soon, they find themselves in the aggressive time-out variation of the Sicilian defense, promising an explosive game. Magnus appears confident and relaxed, assuming an easy victory. With that, he brings out his queen to c7. However, Polgar has a secret plan to trap his pieces. Catching him off guard, she counters by developing her queen to d2. Magnus develops a second knight, and Judith slides her pawn to f3, creating a strong pawn chain as pawns on e4, f3, and g2 are defending each other. Despite Judith having a slight advantage, Magnus's moves are cunning and calculated. Magnus activates his bishop, moving it to e7. After thinking for a while, Polgar castles queenside, knowing that if she wants to win this, she needs to strike now. Both players move a pawn forward, and then the first exchange of minor pieces happen on d4, with Magnus choosing to exchange knights. This trade slightly favors Magnus, since the white knight was in a better position. Magnus moves his light square bishop forward to b7, launching an attack on the middle of the board, threatening the pawn on e4 with 2 separate pieces. Polgar pushes a pawn forward, attacking Magnus's knight and forcing him to retreat. Instead of retreating his knight, Magnus decides to take the pawn on g4, which will result in an extremely weak knight. Polgar slides her rook to g1, attacking the knight, an extremely good move, pushing the knight back even further and putting it on the edge of the board. You may have heard the expression that knights on the rim are grim, which highlights the limitation of knights positioned at the edge of the board, where they have fewer squares to move to and are generally less effective. This knight sitting on h6 is basically out of the game. Magnus even acknowledges the move in between moves, saying,
"Yeah, it's really bad knight."
But he wasn't aware that this was the beginning of his worst nightmare. Polgar starts this nightmare by developing her light squared bishop to e4, taking 2 moves to get her light squared bishop into the center of the board. First moving it to d3, and then to e4, directly threatening Carlsen's bishop, while keeping her own defended by the pawn behind it. After pondering for a moment, Magnus contemplates his next move, delivering a fatal strike to his own position. It's a rarity to witness blunders at such a high level of play, particularly when 2 of the world's top 10 players are facing off. Nevertheless, with limited time on the clock, maintaining composure becomes challenging, even for the reigning world champion. Magnus makes a decisive move, maneuvering his rook to c8, and in response, Judith counters with a cunning play, advancing her dark squared bishop to b6. The crowd observes it all and enthusiasm as this killer move unfolds. Only Magnus and Anish Giri, the world's 3rd-ranked chess player, who is among the spectators, fully grasp the sheer strength of this masterful move. As the intense game continues, it becomes evident why the chosen move holds such immense power. Should Magnus decide to capture the bishop with his queen, Polgar would seize an opportunity for an immediate checkmate by moving her queen up to d7. This cunning maneuver forces Magnus into a tough decision, facing the necessity of sacrificing his queen to avoid a swift defeat. The anticipation builds, and spectators hold their breaths as the match unfolds, hanging in the balance of skill, strategy, and the unexpected twists that only a gripping chess encounter can deliver. In a bold exchange, Carlsen trades his bishop on e4, and Polgar captures his queen with her bishop on c7. She then positions her bishop on d6 in a precarious yet defended spot, guarded by the pawn on e5. Undeterred, Carlsen moves his knight to f5, applying pressure and posing a threat. Nevertheless, Polgar fortifies her position by placing a knight on e4. Despite his resilient play, being down a queen proves too daunting, and Carlsen gracefully resigns the match. They shake hands in a display of sportsmanship, and it is Polgar who emerges victorious from the hard-fought contest.